So in this video, we're going to talk about the rarest comic books ever made. Yes, the rarest, and I mean ever made. I don't mean like an Action Comics #1. Yes, that thing is very rare, but it's not the rarest ever made. They were making hundreds of thousands of copies, sometimes even the millions of those old Superman comics. And I'm also not going to talk about rare in the terms like, well, this is the only 9.9 or the only 10.0. Like I think there's only 199 of Hulk 181. I'm not talking rare. I'm talking about comic books that were made very rare. Some of them just made one. Yes, they just made one comic. And others, they made just a handful. So these will all be the rarest ones ever made. All these on here will be less than 10. First we got is Turtle Mania #1, the gold edition. So Turtles came out in 1984 by Eastman and Laird, and the first issue had a print run of only 3,000. Now by 1986, the Turtles had become actually quite popular. Not as popular as they were going to become, or as popular as they are today. But during that time, a guy over at Metropolis Comics, not related to the auction house Metropolis Comics, decided to make a Turtles Mania little kind of comic book. This would showcase different art, unused stories, things like that in there, just to kind of capitalize on the hype. He talked to Eastman and Laird and they let him do it. So they offered 3 different versions. They offered the normal version, which is just a normal white cover of Turtle Mania. They also then offered a silver edition, which it's very hard to tell the difference. I have them, but they're slightly more gray than the white cover, because the white cover isn't 100% white. It's, it has a little tinge to it. But the silver edition is just slightly darker. Very hard to tell, but they only made 100 of those, and on the back they were numbered out of 100, and Eastman and sometimes Laird signed both of them. But then they made the gold edition, which sold out pretty much instantly. And these were gold covers. Each one had unique original art done by Eastman and Laird. The first half was done by Eastman, the second 5 were done by Laird. And if you looked at them, you got some little piece of original art done. Now, of the 10, 9 have been accounted for, and we can see the actual drawings that Eastman and Laird did for them. And these things are very expensive. One sold on Heritage for $72,000. So they're very, very rare. And if you have a silver edition, which is 1 out of 100, you're looking at probably like 8 to 10 grand for that in a decent grade. So yes, they're very, very expensive and very hard to come by. If you ever do come across one, first thing you need to do is you need to let me know, because I would like to have one. And then second thing is get that thing and keep it. Max half, the red and blue foil editions. These were originally created as kind of like test print runs to see which color looked best. And they ended up not using them at all. They ended up going with purple and gold for these comic books. But that doesn't mean that they're still not extremely rare. They only made 10 of each of these. And then they sold them on their website for about 50 bucks each. And of course, most of them were sold. And right now, there's 6 of the blue on the CGC census and only 3 of the red. So the red is actually more expensive only because of the fact that there's not as many of them that actually been graded. For all we know, even though they only made 10, and they probably got rid of the 10, maybe some of them got thrown away or trashed or whatever, or will never be seen again. But we do know that some do exist, and they actually fetch quite a bit of money. You're probably looking at about $3,000 to $5,000 for a red one, and then about $2,000 to $4,000 for a blue. Damsels #1, the Red Rose Variant. This was produced by Dynamite Comics. Now they only had 10 copies of this ever printed, 10. But they also had a blue and a green that had 25 copies printed, and then also a purple that had 500 copies printed for that variant. Now these are extremely rare. Only 3 have ever been graded so far and haven't really come up for sale at all. It has an estimated price of probably around $300 to $500. Ninjak Zero, the New York ComicCon Variant cast photo cover. Now this was originally going to be given out the New York Comic Con, and they're going to give out one per attendee. But then something happened and they decided to destroy them all, and they didn't want to do it anymore. But they theorized that a few copies got held back for, file copies, file them away, and things like that. So there's estimated around probably, maybe less than 10 that actually exist. If you look on the census, there is only 4 that have ever been graded. by this, and it's called the ComicCon Variant B variant. But yes, there's not that many of it. But just because it's rare does not mean it's valuable. The last one that sold for, you know, under $200. So this one, you're probably looking at around, and that was many years ago, you're probably looking around maybe like $200 to $500 for a variant like this. Now they did end up reusing this cover for Ninjak versus the Valiant Universe as a variant. Le Moretta pinup variants. This is from a Kickstarter campaign which had many different variants. Now if you donated to the Kickstarter for Coffin Comics at least $41 or more, you got a mystery envelope, and in that envelope would have been one of many different variants, and you didn't know which one you're gonna get. Some were pretty rare, some were actually extremely rare, and this one only had 9 ever made. Yes, 9. Why they settled on 9, I don't know, but they settled on the number 9. Now the rarest one's the De Cerrito variant. Now this only has 9, and none have been graded, none have come up for sale. So to put a price on it, it's hard to say, but it'll probably fetch you around the $200 to $500 range. Evil Ernie Octagon editions. These covers were made of leather, and each one had original art on it. And they only made 8 of these, of each edition. And they sold them through Chaos Comics for about $100 each. They're pretty rare, and they all come with original art. If you found one and you got it graded, you're looking at probably close to $1,000 for each one of these. And they don't know how many exist out there because there's not that many that have actually been graded and been sold. Golden Age Ashcan comics. Now these are very unique and very rare. There are probably maybe 1 to maybe 8 of these. There's tons of different ones. So back in the day, what they would do is they wanted to get the copyright of certain titles, you know, like Action Comics, Superman comics, things like that. So what they would do is they would just make up a fake cover. Usually it was a black and white of a cover that they did for something else. I think like the Superman comics was just Action Comics number 7. And then they would send this away to the US government for copyright. And then they would get the copyright for whatever series they wanted. Flash Comics, Thrill Comics, you know, Superman Comics. And many different companies were competing to get the copyrights. So actually the real reason why the first appearance of Captain Marvel is actually in Wiz Comics number 2 is because they tried to get Flash Comics and then Thrill Comics, but they didn't succeed because DC beat them to the punch. And so then what they ended up getting was Wiz Comics. Now the reason why it starts with number 2 is because they kind of considered them sending out to get Flash Comics number 1 or Thrill Comics number 1 as their number 1. And so then they made it the air as when they actually released Wiz Comics. They thought it was technically number 2 issue, but it was really number 1 issue, which they corrected it around issue like 3 or 4 is when they corrected it and put it right back where it should have been. Now because these are really rare and hard to come by, these are very expensive. One sold for almost $300,000, and that was the Ashcan for Superman comics, so they could get basically the copyright of the name. So if you ever come across one of these, just know they are extremely valuable and extremely rare. Superman 409 Super Ombre logo variant. So this is kind of like the previous one. This has to do with copyright issues. So back in 1944, DC, Detective Comics at the time, registered the trademark Super Ombre, and they used an ashcan of basically Superman number 1 to get their copyright. But then they kind of never really used it until Adventure Comics 304 in 1962. And they just kind of had it in a logo, and then it appeared here and there. But then again, their copyright was coming up and they needed to renew it, so that's why they did Superman 409. So that's pretty much why that has a logo there. It's all just for copyright issues, and there's probably less than 10 that exist. There's 9 on the CGC census, and this is a pretty expensive book, probably going to fetch you in the high hundreds to even the low thousands if you have one. And then in 2009, the trademark was canceled because they didn't re-up it. Lady Death, Phoenix Rising Edition. The comic features a cover photo of Alex Hayes, a cosplay model who appeared at the 2011 Phoenix Con as Lady Death. Not much is known about the comic other than 5 were made but never released and sold to the public. So that's all we have really to go off of, and if they did come up, you're probably going to fetch a few $100s for something like this. Venom, Lethal Protector number 1, the white variant. Venom Lethal Protector had a red foil cover. Now underneath that was black, and there has been about a handful, about 150 copies that didn't get the red foil put over, so it just has the black variant. Now those can be very, very expensive, selling for multiple thousands of dollars depending on the grade you have. Even one sold for over $20,000 because it was a newsstand version. Now those are extremely rare, but what's even more rare is the white. So first you have a white cover, then they put the black over, then they put the red foil. Well, you scrape all that stuff away. You can't actually scrape it away, but basically the printing forgot to print both the black and the red foil, and it's just an all white cover. Now these were extremely rare. No one even knew if they existed, and then one popped up, sold on Heritage for over $8,000. But another one has since been graded. So I expect this to be under $5 for sure. Probably these are the only two that will ever exist, and they're just gonna get more and more expensive if you ever come across one. So now we're getting to the point where there's only one ever made of these comics. Bloodshot Zero Air Variant. So this one's a little confusing. So the normal Bloodshot Zero is kind of like a chrome cover. We'll call it the platinum, just normal. But then they decided to make 5,000 variants that were going to be gold. Now on the gold editions, they got rid of the price because this was going to be a variant. Normally says, a couple bucks on there, but they got rid of that. But some of the platinum editions basically had that error on it. So it was a mix between the gold and the platinum. So it was a platinum looking, but the price was gone. It was basically how the gold was supposed to look. Now those are pretty rare. There's probably less than 25 that exist. And ones have sold for $5 grand, $1,500. It's all over the place depending on the grade that you have, but those are very expensive. Now there's also another variant, the Gold Air variant. This kind of has a pinkish looking color, but it is basically the gold, but then it has the price, but then in the logo that's supposed to be gold, it's actually kind of more of a pink color. So it's very weird. They think that this was a prototype that they made one of to basically figure out what they wanted it to look like and things like that. And then this was released at valiantfans.com, and it sold for about $1,500 back in 2013. And then someone sold it on eBay for over $5,000 back in 2016. So there's really only one of this, and that's it. So it's very expensive. Solar Man of Adam, the gold ink prototypes for issue 3 and 5. Now these were prototypes to see if gold ink was a better route to go instead of the more expensive gold foil that they were using and other publishers were using. The artist and colorist, Janet Jackson, tested these out and then kept it in her collection for multiple years until she decided to sell her entire collection as a whole with these inside of them. They made it onto a Valiant fan website in 2015 and sold for a little over $1,000 each. The seller at the time actually gave half the proceeds of the auction back to Jackson. Jackson went on to say that she took this to the printer and they did a couple tests on these two books, and it actually turned out to be very successful. Now I imagine if these came up in auction or for sale now, they'd be probably looking $5,000, $10,000, maybe $20,000 for these. Just as expensive as the Bloodshot. The Bloodshot prototype sold for $5 grand back in 2016. So yeah, I expect these to be much higher now. Unity number 1 golden ticket variant. So unlike the previous ones that are prototypes, these are actually variant covers. So they stuck these in a pull box, and they're kind of like a surprise, kind of like if you got the golden ticket from Willy Wonka. So the only real difference between these, there's 5 made. Each cover was different. They just had a little box that said the golden ticket edition. It wasn't really much of anything else, and that was it. I mean, the cover didn't really look any different. It was just on the UPC code. If you got this golden ticket, you get prizes and a chance to go to the New York Comic-Con in 2014. They've only found 3 of the 5, and they estimate it's probably going to be worth a couple $1,000s if you have one of these. Bloodshot Salvation 12, Louis LaRosa and Vin Diesel variant. So this was originally created just a one-off, and it was raffled away through a charity event. There's only one of these ever made. It was signed by Vin Diesel. Vin Diesel also got original art that he actually raffled off as well. And this is probably gonna be worth around $4,000 to $6,000 if it ever came for sale. But I think that estimate is a bit high. I think it would probably be worth a little less than that, as the Bloodshot movie didn't do very well. Quantum and Woody #1, the second print. The creators are so excited that the first printing sold out that they decided to make another printing. But as kind of like a joke, they made another printing where they only made one. That's it. They just made one of the second printing, and that was it. Then they went on to their third printing. Second print #1 ended up selling for about $1,700. It then got graded a 9.8. Someone offered it for like $8,000 in 2018, but didn't have any takers. So how much is it worth now? Probably looking at the $3,000 to $5,000 range for this. My Little Pony Friendship is Magic #12, 1 million variant. IDW hit a milestone of selling 1 million copies of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic less than a year into its series, making it the best-selling comic in their history. To celebrate this, they decided to create a variant. It was the 1 million variant, and they only made one of it. They also had a competition where they had another variant where they made 12 of that variant. This was graded a CGC 9.6 and was sold through Heritage for a charity and sold back in 2014 for over $6,000. Then in 2017, it sold again through Heritage, but just a little over $4,000. But then by 2020, it sold again for $8,000. The other variant where they made 12 of them, that's worth around $3,000. I hope you like this list of the rarest comics ever made. If you have any of these, then you have some stuff that is very, very rare. Let me know in the comments below if you ever seen some of these, or even if you have some of these. Have a great day.